The dog was inches from her face, jaws wide, muscles, coiled eyes locked onto the target like it had done 100 times before. A K9 trained for war, and it was moving fast. Lila Monroe didn't scream. She couldn't. Her breath had vanished the moment her boots lost grip and she slammed into the pavement. Her hands scraped against the concrete. Her hip hit first. 61 years old, and it still hurt like hell to fall. The officer, tall, white, lean, maybe 30 at most, pointed and shouted something, but the roar in her ears drowned it out. His grin, though, that she saw, cold, confident, that kind of grin you only wear when you think the world will back you up, no matter what you do. She had survived a war zone. 2, actually. She had been mortared, shot at, and buried beneath sand and smoke. But this was the first time she ever felt hunted on American soil. And the dog was still coming. But then something happened. The German shepherd stopped. Abruptly, so close she could feel the heat of its breath on her cheek. It stood frozen, panting, head tilted slightly. It sniffed. Once, twice, then sat down. Just like that. Like it remembered something. Like it understood. And that was when everything changed. 3 days earlier, nobody knew her name. Nobody cared to. She was just another black woman in an old Marine jacket riding a Harley that coughed louder than it ran. Her spine had a slight bend from injuries no one saw. Her boots were worn smooth. The dog tags around her neck most people didn't even notice. But those tags had history. So did she. Lila Monroe had lived in Montgomery, Alabama nearly all her life. Born in 1963, raised on hard-earned silence and church hymns. She learned early that you don't speak unless you mean it. You don't fight unless it's worth bleeding for. Her father served in Korea. Her older brother died in Vietnam. Lila enlisted in the Marines in '82, the only woman in her intake class, and definitely the only black one. She was the kind of soldier who kept her head down and her aim true. Never asked for praise, never needed it. And when her time came to retire after 3 tours and too many memories, she did it quietly. Bought a little house, took care of her sister's grandkids, rode her bike on Sundays, ate breakfast alone at the Waffle House on 4th Street. Nobody bothered her until they did. That morning, she stopped at a gas station off Route 27. She always filled up at Pump 3. Habit. Routine was comfort. She noticed the patrol car when it pulled in, but didn't pay it any mind. Young officers like to flex. Small towns had too many badges, not enough real trouble. She went inside, bought a Gatorade, and nodded politely to the clerk. Her hearing wasn't what it used to be, so she didn't hear the first call from the officer behind her. He thought she was ignoring him. She wasn't. She was just tired. When she stepped outside, he followed her. He asked for ID. She asked why. He didn't like the question. What came next was sudden, too fast. She reached for her license. He shouted. She turned. The dog handler gave the signal. And the door of the K9 unit swung open. What happened after was caught on a teenager's phone. The dog charging, the woman falling, the officer pointing, and then nothing. The dog stopped. The veteran sat up slowly. Her hand touched the animal's head. It didn't move, just sat there, like it was waiting for orders it already understood better than its handler did. The internet saw it all, but only a few people recognized the deeper truth. The dog didn't stop because it was broken. It stopped because it remembered. Somewhere deep in its training was the scent of soldiers, of honor, of field jackets and gun oil and fear swallowed whole. And it found that scent in Lila Monroe. Long before the cameras, before the headlines, before the dog refused to bite, Lila Monroe was already a soldier. She wasn't born with a gun in her hand. She didn't grow up thinking about battlefield medals or military protocol. No, she was raised by silence, by respect, by the quiet strength of her parents and grandparents who had lived through the Jim Crow South and never once bowed their heads. Montgomery in the late 60s wasn't kind to black girls with opinions. Lila learned quickly when to speak and when to hold her breath. Her mother was a school teacher, sharp-eyed, soft voice, the kind who didn't need to yell. Her father was a mechanic, tall and steady, who could rebuild an engine blindfolded. They didn't talk much about the war her brother never came home from, but his folded flag sat above the fireplace like a ghost no one wanted to disturb. By the time Lila turned 18, she'd decided two things. One, she wasn't going to die in Alabama, and two, she wanted to earn something no one could ever take from her. So she joined the Marines. It wasn't easy. Boot camp broke half the recruits. The other half came out with chips on their shoulders. Lila didn't break and she didn't brag. She just kept going. She learned to fire an M16 faster than anyone in her platoon. She could run 6 miles without blinking. She never raised her voice even when the drill sergeant was screaming in her face. The first time someone called her sir by accident, she didn't correct them. She liked the sound of it. Over the years, she served in Okinawa, then Kuwait, and eventually in Afghanistan. She worked logistics, convoy security, and even battlefield triage. Her role changed, but her approach never did: be dependable, be invisible when needed, and never ever panic. In 2005, during a roadside ambush outside Kandahar, her unit lost their lead Humvee. Smoke, chaos, screams. And in the middle of it all, Lila crawled through twisted metal to pull out a young corporal whose leg had been blown apart. His blood soaked her sleeves, but she kept her grip steady. She carried him 100 yards under fire, didn't stop once. That corporal, a white kid from Ohio named Michael Darrow, would later send her a letter every Veterans Day for the next 15 years. The first one read, "To the woman who saved my life and didn't ask for thanks. I see you. I owe you. You're my hero." When Lila finally retired, it wasn't because she was tired. It was because she felt herself becoming invisible again, but this time not by choice. You serve your country, give it your back, your bones, your hearing, and your years. And then one day you're standing in line behind a teenager, rolling their eyes at the flag you wore on your shoulder. She never wanted parades, but she also never expected silence. So she built a quiet life, taught her nephew how to fix engines, walked her dog until it died of old age, took up gardening, rode her motorcycle when the weather allowed, and she wore her Marine jacket like armor. Not to brag, just to remember who she was when the world still saw her. Then came that morning at the gas station. It had been ordinary, bright sky, clean air, a familiar road. But when Officer Clay Mitchell pulled in behind her, something shifted. She didn't know his name then, didn't recognize the expression on his face, but she knew that look. It was the same one she saw in enemy fighters in the mountains, a mixture of fear and superiority, of someone looking for a reason to pull the trigger. He asked for ID. She asked why. And just like that, she became a threat. She remembered his tone more than the words. Aggressive, dismissive, certain that if he raised his voice, the world would tilt in his favor. When she reached for her wallet, he raised his hand. When she hesitated, confused, he made his call. The back of the police SUV opened, and the dog came out. It all happened in seconds. But it took decades to get there. A lifetime of service, of sacrifice, of silence. And now she was face down on pavement with a predator bearing down on her. The question wasn't why. It was how this could still happen. The sun was just beginning to rise when Lila Monroe pulled out of her driveway that morning. She rode slow, like always. Her bike wasn't built for speed anymore, neither was she. The engine grumbled along like a loyal friend, steady and familiar. Her hands, rough and calloused from years of labor and combat, gripped the handlebars like they were holding history. She had a simple plan: fill up her tank at the gas station on Route 27, grab a Gatorade, and head out to visit her niece's baby in Mobile. The baby had been born the week before. Lila had only seen pictures. This ride was her way of showing up, of saying, "You've got family, you've got roots." The air was crisp, the road quiet. Her thoughts wandered. Until they didn't. She saw the patrol car pull into the station just as she was stepping off the bike. Didn't think much of it. Cops came and went. They filled up. They waved. She nodded back. No trouble. She didn't know Officer Clay Mitchell, and he didn't know her. But what he saw was a middle-aged black woman in a military jacket riding an old motorcycle. She didn't look threatening. She looked out of place. That was enough. Lila walked inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her. She grabbed a bottle from the cooler and dropped a few bills on the counter. The clerk, a teenage boy in a hoodie, mumbled a thank you. When she turned to leave, Mitchell was there, blocking the door. He asked her if the bike was hers. She nodded. He asked for ID. She hesitated. Why? That's when the temperature changed. He repeated himself louder this time. His hand hovered near his belt. Lila didn't flinch, but she felt the weight of it. "I'm a retired Marine," she said, calm level. "That's my bike. That's my name on the registration." "ID," he snapped. "Now." Lila reached slowly, carefully. But she made one mistake. She looked him in the eye. Later, people would argue over what happened next. Online debates, news panels, comment sections flooded with opinions. But what mattered was simple. He saw her as a challenge. Not a citizen, not a veteran, just another problem to be controlled. And when she turned to step outside, he called for backup. That's when the second officer pulled in the K-9 unit. It escalated fast. Mitchell claimed she was non-compliant, that she was refusing lawful orders, that her hands moved aggressively. Lila, for her part, didn't say much. She didn't scream, didn't shout, just stood her ground. Until they gave the order. Deploy the dog. The back of the SUV popped open with a mechanical hiss. The dog, big black, in tan, lean like a coiled spring, leapt from the vehicle like it had done it 100 times. Its claws scratched asphalt. Its breath steamed in the cool air. It didn't hesitate. Neither did Lila. She turned to move away, not run, but step. Her boot caught the edge of the curb. Her balance broke. She fell. Hard. The dog kept coming. A few feet away, the officer raised his hand and pointed. The boy filming from across the lot caught the exact moment the woman on the ground, the dog mid-run, and the cop smiling. It was a smirk, really. A smug, satisfied smirk. The kind you wear when you think the story's already written, and you're the one holding the pen. But the dog stopped. Sharp, abrupt. It didn't bark, it didn't bite, it didn't obey. It stood still, then sat down. Just like that. Its ears twitched, it sniffed once, then again. And then it did something no one expected. It walked slowly to Lila's side and lowered its head. She didn't move. Not at first. Her hands were scraped. Her elbow throbbed. Her chest burned. But when she opened her eyes, she saw the dog, looking at her, and she whispered just loud enough to be picked up on the boy's phone microphone. "You remember me, don't you?" In the Marines, she'd worked with dogs like this, trained them, fed them, bandaged them. She'd lost one in Helmand Province after a mortar strike. She never forgot that sound. Neither did the dog. Because some instincts once burned into the bone never fade. Honor has a scent, and the dog found it in her. The boy kept filming. The officer kept yelling. But the dog wouldn't move. The scene unfolded in stunned silence. The German shepherd, breathing hard, chest rising and falling in rhythm with the tension around it, refused to lunge. It stood protectively over Lila Monroe, almost as if shielding her. The handler's voice grew more insistent. Commands barked in sharp syllables. Get back, engage, attack. But the dog stayed put. It didn't growl, it didn't whine. It just sat there, tail, low eyes, locked onto the woman on the ground. And when she shifted to sit upright, wincing from the impact, it moved closer and nudged its snout under her hand. Gasps rippled from onlookers across the gas station lot. A woman near Pump 1 clasped her mouth with both hands. A delivery driver pulled out his phone. The boy recording from the curb stepped forward a few feet, and the officer froze. What he had was a trained K-9 unit refusing to follow a lawful command. What he didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, was that the animal recognized something in Lila no badge could erase. Dogs like this aren't just trained to attack. They're trained to smell intent fear weapons, and sometimes familiarity. Combat handlers know a dog remembers smells better than people remember faces. Sweat, gun oil, blood, smoke. They remember who stood beside them and who didn't. Lila had worked alongside these animals in forward operating bases from Helmand to Fallujah. She'd patched up wounded ones when their paws hit IED shrapnel. She'd slept next to them when night patrols turned into dawn firefights. She had buried 3. And now, decades later, one of their kind was returning the favor. Clay Mitchell didn't know any of that. All he knew was that his authority had just been challenged in public. The handler pulled back on the leash. The dog resisted. He tried again more forcefully. Still nothing. The second officer radioed for a supervisor, and Lila just sat there breathing hand on the dog's fur. The moment was no longer about law and order. It was about power. And who held it? Mitchell took a step forward. His smirk was gone. His voice cracked, unsure. The crowd was growing. Dozens of eyes now on him. Phones out, cameras rolling. Not one voice from the crowd cheering. Just silence, thick and disapproving. He didn't see a threat anymore. He saw a problem. A viral one. "Ma'am, someone," finally said a third officer, arriving late, approaching with hands open. "Are you hurt?" Lila didn't answer at first. She slowly stood her back, straight, blood trickling from her scraped elbow. She looked at the dog. It wagged its tail once, as if to say, "You're good now." Then it turned and walked slowly back to the handler, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. The supervisors arrived minutes later. By then, the story had already left the parking lot. The boy's video hit TikTok within 5 minutes. By the time Lila declined medical attention and rode away still aching but upright, the video had over 200,000 views. 3 hours later, it was on national news. The clip wasn't long. 23 seconds. No voiceover, no captions. Just a single line spoken quietly as the dog sat beside her. "You remember me, don't you?" And that was all it took. Veterans recognized her name first. A couple of Marines from her old unit reposted the clip with messages like, "That's Staff Sergeant Monroe. Respect." Others started adding photos, patches, testimonials. Within hours, the narrative shifted. This wasn't a story about a civilian resisting orders. It was a story about a decorated veteran being treated like a suspect. Within a day, hashtags flooded social media. "Honor has a memory. She served too, not just another black woman." But the most powerful trend came from the community Clay Mitchell didn't think would notice. The one he thought had forgotten her. The veterans. By the time Clay Mitchell returned home that evening, the world had already changed around him. He didn't notice it right away. He wasn't the kind to scroll through trending hashtags. He didn't check his mentions. He didn't see the flood of veteran pages sharing the video or the quiet fury rising in comment sections. But others did. The mayor's office did. The police chief did. And the local American Legion Hall, well, they noticed first. It started with a phone call, then another, then 100 more. Some were polite, others less so. All of them demanded the same thing: accountability. Because Lila Monroe wasn't just a woman who fell at a gas station. She was a Marine, one of theirs. And she had bled for the country that now watched her be treated like a threat. The commander of the local VFW chapter, retired Colonel Ray Whitman, was the first to speak on record. Standing on the steps of his lodge in uniform, flanked by 2 Purple Heart recipients, he faced the cameras with a voice that had once barked orders through artillery fire. "We don't care what color her skin is," he said. We care that she served with honor. We care that she was targeted, humiliated, and treated like a criminal on the very soil she swore to defend." He paused, then added, "We bury soldiers like her with full honors. We don't sick dogs on them." Veterans from all over the country began to post their own messages. Some wore their uniforms. Some held signs. Some simply looked into the camera and said her name. "I stand with Lila Monroe." The phrase began to spread, not just as support but as warning, because this wasn't going to fade in a news cycle. The next morning, before the police chief could finalize a press statement, over 24 veterans arrived at the police department's front steps. They didn't chant. They didn't shout. They stood, still, silent, shoulder to shoulder. Some wore medals, others brought flags. One man held a framed photograph of Lila from her days in uniform. They stayed there for 5 hours, didn't say a word. Inside the department, the air turned cold. Clay Mitchell, now facing an internal review, tried to deflect. He claimed miscommunication, claimed he didn't know who she was. But no one cared who he thought she was. They cared what he did. The press conference came at 4 p.m. The chief, eyes tired, voice flat, announced that Officer Mitchell had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But it wasn't enough. By then, pressure was mounting from every direction: city council, military families, even national leaders. By midnight, the message was clear. You either fire him or we remember this every November. The resignation came early the next morning. A single statement sent to local media. Effective immediately, Officer Clay Mitchell resigns from his position with the department. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. The kind that comes when even those who once supported you no longer can. Lila didn't smile when she heard the news. She didn't post a victory video, didn't gloat. She was at her niece's house holding a 6-day-old baby girl in her arms, humming softly. The phone buzzed on the table. She let it ring, not because she didn't care, but because justice to her had never been about revenge, only about recognition. Across the country, the footage kept playing. The moment the dog stopped, the way she whispered to it, the refusal to flinch. And for many, especially those who had worn a uniform, the message was unmistakable. She didn't just survive. She reminded us who we're supposed to be. Reporters tried to reach her for days. They camped outside her niece's home. They left business cards in her mailbox. They called the VFW Lodge, asked former unit members, even tried contacting the Marine Corps archives. But Lila Monroe didn't respond. She wasn't hiding. She just didn't feel the need to explain what everyone had already seen. She'd lived long enough to know that not every truth needs to be shouted. Some truths are clearest when you simply stand your ground and let others speak for you. Still, the invitations came. Morning shows, podcasts, veteran specials, political panels. They wanted a face, a quote, a headline. She gave them none. She went back to her small house, fixed the screen door, bought groceries, read a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird under the porch light. The world spun around her like a storm, and she stayed still. But the world didn't forget. The clip became more than a viral moment. It became a symbol. In classrooms, teachers showed it when discussing service and prejudice. In churches, pastors spoke of it as a parable of grace and restraint. In small-town council meetings, veterans brought it up to demand better training for local police. It even made its way into a congressional hearing on law enforcement conduct, quoted by a senator who served 2 tours himself. Courage, he said, is not barking louder. It's knowing when to sit down even when others command you to attack. Then came the ceremony. It wasn't large, not some White House reception or a national broadcast. It was hosted by her town, held at the community center gymnasium where she once taught first aid to young recruits. Fold-out chairs, a borrowed podium, a flag that had hung in her brother's bedroom since 1971. The mayor gave a short speech, so did the local police chief. But the words that mattered came from someone else. Retired Corporal Michael Darrow, the same man she'd carried out of a burning Humvee in 2005. He flew in from Ohio unannounced wearing his dress blues. He asked to speak. Nobody said no. He walked to the microphone, looked across the small room and began quietly. "You saved my life," he said, "and I'm just one of many." He paused. "I've never once seen you ask for attention, for glory, for even a thank you. And now when the world is finally looking at you, you turn away." He glanced down, then smiled. "That's why we follow people like you." The room fell quiet. Some wiped their eyes. Lila sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, her jacket zipped all the way up. When Darrow stepped down, she rose slowly and walked to the podium. She stood there for a moment, then leaned in, and said only one thing. "I remember all of you." Then she stepped back. The applause wasn't loud, but it was long and real. Later that evening, after the chairs had been stacked and the coffee urns packed up, a young woman approached her in the parking lot. She was maybe 22, civilian, nervous. She handed Lila a folded piece of paper. "My grandfather served," she said softly. "He passed before I was born. I never met him. But you reminded me of the way my mom talks about him. Thank you." Lila took the note, nodded, and smiled gently. When she got home, she unfolded it. In careful handwriting, it read, "You made me believe in America again." Weeks passed. The headlines faded as they always do. New scandals, new stories, new outrage. But in a small town in Alabama, life slowed back down to the rhythm of cicadas and quiet morning rides. Lila Monroe returned to her routine, but it wasn't the same. Neighbors waved longer than usual. A group of teenagers, usually glued to their phones, helped her carry groceries without being asked. Even the gas station clerk, the one who never used to look up now, greeted her with a respectful "morning, ma'am" every time she walked in. She never said much about that day. Not to her family, not to the men at the VFW, not even to the young girl who came by once a week to help her with yard work. But if you stood near her porch in the early morning, you'd hear the Harley kick to life. Same engine, same jacket. Only now she rode with something different in her eyes. A peace that doesn't come from winning, but from being seen. The dog, meanwhile, had a name, Ranger. After the incident, he was retired early from active police work. Too unpredictable, they said, too emotional. But a retired handler in Georgia, a Marine himself, requested to adopt him. Said the dog had a soul that still knows what honor smells like. They approved the transfer. The two have been inseparable ever since. Clay Mitchell moved out of state. No formal charges were filed. No lawsuits were pursued. Lila never asked for any. But his name is now attached to a lesson plan used in law enforcement training across 3 states: use of force, situational awareness, and respect. His image appears in slide 5. Lila appears in slide 6. On Veterans Day that year, something unexpected happened. During the parade downtown, small just floats and flags, and a middle school marching band, the mayor paused his speech halfway through. He gestured toward the edge of the square where Lila had been sitting quietly in the shade. He didn't announce her by name, didn't call her a hero. He just said, "Some people serve once, others serve for a lifetime." And the crowd turned, and they stood. All of them, just like the veterans did on the courthouse steps. No chants, no cheers, just a moment of standing. Later that night, Lila sat on her porch, a warm cup of tea in her hands. The sky above her was dark and wide, the stars scattered like old medals. The wind carried the faint sound of distant music, and for a moment she closed her eyes and remembered a different place, a different uniform, a different version of herself. She opened her eyes again and took a breath. Not a breath of relief, but one of purpose. Because she had learned something that day at the gas station. Something she had always known but had never truly felt. That even when the world forgets who you are, your honor remembers. And sometimes so does a dog.